I'm just curious, how many educators are here tonight? Could you just raise your hand? Okay, I guess I better be careful what I say. Are there any questions? There's several people I would love to introduce because I look around this room and I see a lot of people I know, and I won't, but I am going to introduce just a few, so forgive me. I want to just introduce my wife, Mary, and my youngest son, Teddy, who are here. I may mention them a couple of times during this talk, so at least you can identify with them. And I also want to introduce a guy who helped me with this book, and I can't tell you how much he helped me, because I never considered myself a good writer, and he taught me how to write, and he is unbelievable, Dennis Farney. And finally, I would like to introduce two really important people to me, and I can't tell you what it means that they are here tonight, and that is my parents, Marion and Henry Bloch. And I hate to embarrass them, but I'm just going to ask if you both would stand for some recognition, please. They're in the back. I think a lot of us probably think we have the best mom and dad in the world, but I got to tell you, I do. And I was always so pleased and fortunate that they always put their children's happiness before their own. And I have to tell you, too, that the title of my book, Stand for the Best, were not my words. They came from a speech that my dad gave a number of years ago at the mayor's prayer breakfast here in Kansas City, and that's where that comes from. You know, if somebody had told me 20 or even 40 years ago that I would be up here in front of a group like this talking about my experiences in urban education, I would have thought they had confused me with somebody else. I remember when I was in third grade, my teacher asked the students, draw a picture with your crayons of what you would like to be when you grow up. And I looked around the room and I saw other kids drew things like fire engines or police cars or professional athletes, more action-oriented pictures, and I drew a picture of a man sitting behind a desk. And above that desk was a sign with two words on it, income taxes. And I have to be honest with you, in third grade, I didn't have a clue what income taxes were. I didn't have any idea how wonderful they are. But what I did know is I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps. Henry Bloch and Richard Bloch, of course, founded H&R Block here in Kansas City. Well, after I got out of school, my dream was realized. And in fact, I did become that man sitting behind the desk. And I enjoyed a 19-year, a wonderful career at H&R Block. I worked with some incredible people. It was really a fantastic opportunity. And then I reached my ultimate goal, which was to succeed my father as CEO of the company. I was 38 years old at the time. But I have to tell you, it was about at that time that I began to think that something was missing in my life. Something big, something fundamental. Now, Mary was thinking I was having a midlife crisis. But I assured her I had no interest in moving to Tahiti or buying a new sports car. It was something much deeper than that. I should also tell you that for me, being a CEO was all-consuming. I worried a lot, and I was worn out from worrying. I began to think if I could achieve a totally different kind of personal fulfillment, one that was not financially related, and one where the focus was not on me, that maybe I could become happier. And gradually my thoughts turned to urban education for a couple of reasons. First of all, I had two prior experiences as a teacher. My French professor in college offered me the opportunity to teach fifth grade French at the elementary school in Claremont, California. He told me I couldn't get paid, but I could get college credit. And so I did that, and I enjoyed that. But I have to tell you, my students, I feared, really didn't take me seriously. They looked at me more as a 20-year-old college student than as a real teacher. And that became especially evident when they started to call me Mr. Blockhead. But despite that experience, it really was very satisfying. And about 30 years ago, I actually taught taxes at H&R Block, and I promise you, not one of my students called me Mr. Blockhead. And I began to think about urban education, even though, to be honest with you, I had never stepped inside of an urban school in my life. But I thought then, as I do today, that urban education lies at the very heart of our nation's most urgent problem. But please understand, my thoughts about making a career change were as much for me as it was for the students that I would teach. But I agonized about this decision. It was the toughest decision I ever made. I knew that there was a risk. There was a risk that I wouldn't be a good teacher. There was a risk that I wouldn't like it. And there was a risk that if I wanted to come back to H&R Block, that I wouldn't have that opportunity. I made that decision, and so many people thought I was nuts. It made me second guess, I have to be honest with you, my decision. But somebody had told me that, you know, before the end of our lives, we watch what is like a movie that appears before our eyes. And you want to make sure that it's worth watching. So I went and I talked to my dad a number of times about this idea of leaving the company and pursuing a totally different type of life, and he was always willing to hear me out. And one day I came in, I said, Dad, I've made my decision, I'm going to leave. And he said, just take a few days off and go on a vacation with Mary. Think this through. This is an important, life-changing decision. And we did go away to Colorado, went up and down the mountains, and I went up and down in my mind, seesawing between, yes, I am going to leave, no, I'm going to stay. And I finally came home and I told Dad, I am going to leave. And he was terribly disappointed. But like the wonderful father and the wonderful mother that I've always had, they were both extremely supportive of that decision. And to this day, I am extremely, extremely grateful. This was back in 1995, and suddenly I was faced with two new questions. Where am I going to teach, and what am I going to teach? Well, my options were fairly limited because I, at the time, did not have a teaching certificate, so I really couldn't teach in the public schools. I went to Rockhurst University, and I worked for 2 years to get that certificate. And concurrently, I worked across the street at St. Francis Xavier School, a small inner-city Catholic school that was willing to take a chance on someone who didn't have a teaching experience and no inner-city teaching, without a teaching certificate or a teaching experience. I became the middle school math teacher at St. Francis Xavier. And at the time, the school was really struggling financially. The parish enrollment, the parish population had declined. The demographics of the neighborhood had changed dramatically over the years. And at that time, St. Francis was primarily serving inner-city African-American low-income families, most of whom could not afford the $2,000 annual tuition. So the school was in a position of not being very selective in admitting students. Almost anyone who could pay at least some tuition could come to St. Francis. Now, I taught math for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was always my favorite subject in school. But secondly, I feel that math is a whole lot more than just crunching numbers. It is about solving problems. And when you think of it, and I know you think of it, that's what life is. We all face lots of problems every day. And I feel that the more experience we have in solving problems, the better we will address them. So I began to make this transition from the boardroom to the classroom, and I began to ponder some very serious and deep-rooted questions like, why is it that so many inner-city kids don't use a good education as their ticket to the middle class?